Hey everybody, Neon here. I'm starting a new series that's looking at the game of the week is what I'm calling it, which really focuses a deep dive on some specific game from the ETS that I thought that we could learn a lot from. The game I selected this week was the match between Erik9099 playing Kennadins versus Sunyveil playing Combrei Alessi. The game that we're going to be focusing on is game number 4 of their set that they played in the semifinals. There are actually the thing that I want to focus on in this video is actually the way in which deck building choices makes a difference in how games turn out. Because I think that both of these players made some minor changes to their respective lists, and that this is made a big difference in how the game ended up turning out ultimately. Now, one thing to stress is I'm not necessarily saying categorically that these changes are good or bad. I'm more just kind of emphasizing how they turned out in the course of this specific game, which is one data point, so take it with a grain of salt, obviously, but it does tell you about what these deck building choices are going to do and what they sort of mean. So let's quickly go through Erik9099's deck and the changes that he made. There were some minor changes here and there. The only one that I'm going to point out that's actually a bigger deal is basically he cut 4 Spark Catchers for 4 Channel the Tempest. It's a pretty big change in that specific card, going from a really useful early game play, a nice little body that trades and can activate a combustion cell, and then turn that into a big haymaker finisher. So this change will make you, as you can probably imagine, weaker in the early game and stronger in the late game. But one also thing to mention is it does mean that you have less fuel for your combustion cells, which is an important element of the deck. You don't actually play a ton of Kennadin, and as a result, you are less likely to have as much material going into the late game. One thing to note about this change that I am not crazy about as to why I'm not super happy about this composition of the deck exactly is actually the Gear Cruncher that's in the market. This is a card that in the Kennadins deck is definitely not at its best, and especially without the Spark Catchers, you really, I don't think, have enough density of the Kennadins to be playing this in the market. This doesn't come up in the course of the specific game, but I personally would be looking to change that into something else, like maybe like the Flamestoker, for example. Also, of course, in case you guys didn't know, there isn't a scene banner in the market. That's actually a Molat and Nakova. Doesn't, once again, not relevant for this game, but that's just a weird thing about the deck image generator. That's a glitch that it can't process the Molat and Nakova. So that's really all I have to say about Erik's deck. It's an interesting change, and definitely the Channel the Tempest element will come up in the course of this game. But the one that I want to spend more time talking about is actually Sunyveil's deck, because he did a few more changes. They're subtle, because they're kind of cards that you would expect to see in the deck that he changed from one to another, but I think that it's still interesting to highlight what these differences are. Okay, so let's go through some of them. One, we have 2 Wandering Wisps as opposed to 1. I personally don't like this change because I'm just generally not a huge fan of the Wandering Wisp plan in this deck. I understand why there's the 1 in the deck. It's a useful tool to have access to with the Crownwatch press gang late in the game. So I can buy the first one. The second one I really don't, because I feel like if you're playing 2 in your deck, you kind of you're almost saying you want to draw it. And obviously, there are some cases in which having 2 to fetch up with the Crownwatch press gang is nice, but my issue is if you're in a game in which 1 Wandering Wisp wasn't good enough, there's a pretty good chance that the second one isn't going to be that much better. So I'm not sure. I mean, I can definitely still, as I said, get behind the first one, but the second one does add some more air to the deck, and that's kind of a little bit of a theme in Sunyveil's version of the deck. I feel that there's a lot more air, a lot less meat, and then this is something that could end up being a trouble for this version of the deck, and you'll actually see specifically in this game that we're going to be watching that it's going to come up as a bit of an issue. 4 safe returns is a common number for this deck. I personally am not crazy, but I would rather play 3. But I mean, I understand why people are playing 4. I just, once again, it's this idea of not having as much meat in the deck. It's a card that drawing 2 in some situations can be something of an issue. Some of the specific changes that I think are more meaningful is we do have the split of 2 Desert Marshals and 2 Valkyrie Enforcers as opposed to for Valkyrie Enforcers. This is a switch that I am not happy about personally. I think that the plan of making a Valkyrie Enforcer and then buffing it up with a combination of pump spells and sort of Unity, etc. It is a realistic plan in the metagame right now, and the Desert Marshal is just not, I don't think, good enough in quite enough situations. And once again, it's just not as impactful of a card, because you really just need something to be able to attack and get on some damage and wear some weapons, and Desert Marshal is just so much worse at that. There are definitely situations in which he's better. He's good against killer attacks. He's good against something like Kenna, really great against her, really good against weapons. He does do stuff, don't get me wrong. I just think that he has some issues in the metagame right now, especially in a deck like this that is so low on action and has the chance of running out of steam. And the last one that I'll point out is actually the change of using 2 Predatory Instinct versus the Initiation. This is like, obviously having cheaper spells is really nice. With Alessi, allows you to have all these tempo plays. The issue is, I feel like this deck, you have a lot of power, so you're going to curve out pretty consistently, and having that extra power cost on the Xenon Initiation isn't that big of a deal. Also, as I've sort of said, like, this deck just kind of chronically cutting a little bit of meat, cutting a little bit of fat. I'm not going to go into it too much, but you also see the cut of 1 Stand Together going down to 2 in the main deck, and 1 sort of Unity, only 2 in the main deck. I'm cutting out of 1 of each, and the less Xenon Initiations. It just feels like this build of the deck is a little bit, it's leaner, and as a result, it's a little bit less likely to be able to have this team to go late, which is one of the things that's so important about this deck. Now, previous versions do have the possibility of being clunky, so I kind of would be interested in exploring something that was a hybrid, something in between those 2 ranges, but I feel that this version has the chance of running into some problems. So anyway, that's all I have to say about the compositions of the deck. You'll see how this plays out in the course of the games we watch. Okay, so we're getting into the game now. The first couple turns play out sort of as you would expect, a little bit of back and forth, just kind of curving out Erik's hand. You can't see right now, but you will just see it soon. We're going at 2 times speed because a lot of the plays are going to be pretty standard and pretty understandable. Like, there's not a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. But one of the things to note is that that Erik can't let the teacher hit him because you have so much card draw in your hand and in your deck, and if you get hit by it, then you probably will not be able to function basically as a deck. The other thing to note is that in this position we should talk a bit about Sunyveil's hand. So the cards that he has available are Vanquish, Predatory Instinct, and Desert Marshal. None of these cards are actually particularly good in this matchup. I didn't really mention about the Vanquish when I was talking about the deck. I think the 4 is defensible, especially if you're expecting a lot of time decks, but it definitely has matchups where it's not at its greatest. But and this is one of them. But this entire hand is kind of garbage in this situation. One of the questions that you should actually think about is playing out this Desert Marshal at the end of turn. There's not that many great silence targets in the Kennadins deck, and this, as I mentioned, there are no Spark Hatchers, meaning that it's a little bit granted in light, and just forcing your opponent to trade a 1/1 for a 2/1 is kind of interesting, actually. Sunyveil doesn't seem to think about it very hard, and I'm not saying for sure that it's right, but it's something that I'm at least interested in thinking about, and I don't know which one would work better in this game, but definitely as we watch this game, you'll see that this Desert Marshal hangs out in Sunyveil's hand for a really long time, and same with this Predatory Instinct. This, obviously, like as I was mentioning in the deck tech sort of section, is that the Predatory Instinct would have been a Xenon Initiation, which also isn't great in the situation either, but it just, it goes through this major theme of, lacking meat in this deck, and this is a situation in which you would love to have more meat. So anyway, we'll continue on. The student grows, the opponent plays out a bunch of 1/1s, etc., etc. Nothing too exciting happening here for the next couple turns. This is the case also. I'm very interested at the end of this turn, specifically to actually play out the Desert Marshal. We didn't see something like a kind of come out the previous turn as a result of charging the combustion cell, so there's less likely to have it, and you have 2 in hand right now. We get another Find the Way, well, not another we get a Find the Way, which is a low impact card here, goes to this theme once again. I mean, this is something also about the Combrei deck that is almost an illusion that it has, where it makes itself look like it's doing a bit more than it has, more than it does. It has the potential of flooding out and not really doing a lot, but something like Find the Way feels like you're doing something, you're spending your power every turn, but this is not a card that's impacting the board in any way. I understand why Find the Way is in the deck. There are ways in which this deck is very power hungry, and it charges up Alessi. I totally understand that, but it's a card that can make you feel like you're not flooding when you actually are, and I worry about that in this kind of deck where can convince people into shaving down the meat of the deck when in reality you are too low on action. Once again, though, in this particular situation, very interested playing up that Desert Marshal to get something going. So we'll continue on here. We're now in a situation where Erik can use the combustion cell to copy some of the students, get a couple of those into 7/7 range. I am, like once again, this Desert Marshal, it's not doing very much. Playing it out here in order to silence one of them is interesting. Now here's where one of the junctures where I think that the deck building choices specifically go wrong for Sunyveil. It'd be possible right here, if you had access to the Xena Initiation, that you could find the way, play a power, vanquish one of the students, and then initiate on the second student. But because of Predatory Instinct as opposed to Xena Initiation, that killer attack would be a trade as opposed to just eating it up. And that difference is obviously really quite the big deal and makes me unhappy as to why we have the Predatory Instinct. So that's just an interesting point to draw out in the situation of, once again, the places in which specifics of the deck building have sort of gone wrong. We are going to get the most logical play that we can kind of get here. Given the situation, we attack in, try to bait a block with a student, doesn't take it, decides to just chump instead. Running out of Kennadins here, which also emphasizes why I was so interested in trading the Marshal earlier, because these Kennadins are so important for being able to charge up something like the Channel the Tempest. We are going to get this bit of an exchange here, which works out in the favor of Erik with the torch on the back end. We do have the possibility here of playing out the Merchant. Now, what we'll see here is actually a bit of an error from Sunyveil, in my opinion, which is unusual given the fact that I think his technical play is usually very good. He's going to trade the Marshal for a Sword of Unity, which is obviously really good against this deck a lot of the times, but there's a student on the other side that's massive, right? Like, how are we attacking through this with our sword? You're actually at the perfect point now where you have the 8 power with the Merchant in play. You can trade your Marshal, get a Great Parliament that's in the market, play that out. You have 2 4/4s in play in the air, and your opponent really has to find an answer to this really quickly. Otherwise, they're just going to die immediately. And especially with the other Marshal in hand, you can silence one out of the air, maybe initiate to kill the other ones, something like that. You can set up a really good lethal in the air through a lot of different ways here, but instead decides to go for the sword, which I'm not a fan of, but it works out. Well, he's punished for it, actually. It doesn't actually work out. But that is the play that he decides. But anyway, we get a play here, sort of just treads water a little bit within a bunch of assembly lines. We get the sword out, but you'll see here immediately, the sword doesn't, like, even if you didn't get all of these 1/1s being in play, I guess you could do this sort of attack, but you didn't know these 1/1s were going to be in play. The Wandering Wisp is drawn, once again, not a particularly impactful card in the situation. We are going to get some brutal beats here, though. With the end of hostilities, Sunyveil is really relying on drawing a Merchant or a killer effect, something like that, in order to finish the game from this situation, but does not. So we're going to finish the game pretty quickly from here. essentially because Erik draws much better. But we see that Sunyveil definitely ran out of gas given this situation, and that was a problem. And I think that the composition of Sunyveil's deck made it likely to have happened. And I tried not to stress this too much in the course of the video, but we see here that the Desert Marshal is still in hand. Imagine had this been a Valkyrie Enforcer on turn 3. You just play this out, you silence the one of the 1/1s, who cares? But, like, your opponent's at 5. If the game played out the same way, you win. You obviously can't make deck building choices based on just one-off evidences. Like in the situation, I agree that this is a matchup where Marshall's not at its best, but this is one of the risks that you have, and it's also not like Grenadine drone heavy decks. Go wide heavy decks are not something that just exists in the meta right now. This is not a strategy that's totally crazy. But anyway, that's how things worked out. Sunyveil does go on to lose the match, unfortunately. Erik does move on. He goes on to win the entire tournament. Very good. Congratulations to him. I think that his deck was really interesting. I also didn't talk too much about how great Channel the Tempest was in that matchup. It was absolutely spectacular in the games that I saw here. And even though there are people, I know that Flash, for instance, isn't a fan of it, and he's obviously a big advocate of the deck, but, different strokes for different folks, etc., etc. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode. Let me know if this is something that you're interested in. Please like, subscribe, share, etc. This actually makes a really big difference. Like, I'm just starting this channel out again, having to move over some of my content. So I would really appreciate that kind of support. It will make a big difference to me. But yeah, also, if you find other games specifically that you want me to analyze like this, I would definitely take suggestions. Always looking out for great games like this, even if it's something from somebody's stream. I'm willing to take a look at that, too, if it's particularly interesting. So hit me up. You can find me on Discord, etc. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.